Hey friends, my name is Steven with Leviathan Snakes, and today I wanted to discuss photography, specifically photography for these guys. So this is Chai. He is our 6-month-old clown ball python. The number one most important thing when it comes to photography, regardless of if it's snakes or not, is lighting. In fact, I would say that you could take a DSLR camera, you could take a Nikon D850, like $3,000 camera with an amazing lens, and if you are not sure how to use lighting or how to optimize the camera for the lighting, you would take a better picture with an iPhone. And the reason why is that the iPhone will optimize itself given the lighting conditions. It doesn't require the user to manually go in and adjust each of the settings. The trade-off that you have is because you don't have as much control with the iPhone on exactly how it's going to optimize everything, you might not be able to get the exact kind of shot that you want, but honestly, the iPhone cameras are amazing, and this isn't meant to be a plug for Apple, but it is completely capable of taking some really, really high quality images. There are lots of different ways that you can approach lighting, but generally you want to do whatever your photography is in a well-lit area. And the easiest way to get a well-lit area is just simply to go outside during the day. But just simply going outside during the day does not necessarily give you the best lighting. In my opinion, a noonday sun, cloudless sky, and you are just out there in the middle of your yard is going to be a little bit too harsh for most subjects. It will wash them out, and it's just not going to quite give you the soft edges that I think make really, really good pictures. If you have the chance, this is much, much harder to do because it's such a limited amount of time. There's this term called the golden hour that's used for photography and cinema, and it's about the hour right after sunrise or the hour right before sunset. And if you ever look outside and you can see like the really nice warm golds and oranges of the sky, that's the golden hour. And what it does is that with the light being softer at that time, your subjects will just kind of appear to glow. It's really, really cool on how the effect has whenever you're using photography, even if it is just an iPhone. So pretty much any picture you take during the golden hour, as long as the subject is fully illuminated, that's the other thing. You need to be in the sunlight, not just in a shadow or something. You are going to be able to get some really, really cool, good pictures. That said, shadows are probably the other way that you can get some good, strong outdoor pictures, as long as there's enough ambient light throughout like the rest of the area. So if you are, it's middle of the day, bright sunlight, and it's too harsh to be out in the sun. If you can be in an area that is in shadow, not super dark, just shadowed, it will soften the sunlight enough where you can still get some really cool pictures. The only thing you have to be aware of is that if there's, let's say you're underneath a tree and you're using the shadow of the tree, if there are any spots of direct sunlight that come through, they are going to appear incredibly bright on your subject. So you have to kind of balance what you want. Pretty much you either need to be all the way in the sunlight or all the way in the shadow, unless you're trying to do some really, really interesting artistic shots, which is perfectly valid. It's just a little bit harder to get. If you are going to do indoor lighting is a lot easier to control, but it takes a little bit more preparation before you get it done. There is generally in photography a kind of standard of a 3-point lighting technique. And you can do it with 2, you can do indoor photography with 1. It's just that if you use a 3-point lighting technique, which I'll talk about here in a second, it is giving you more tools in order to tailor your shots. So the 3-point lighting technique has 3 different main types of lights. One is your key light. The key light is the light that is primarily used to illuminate your subject. And if we were looking at this shot right now, I would say my key light is actually this window, okay? And you want your key light to be about eye level or a little bit higher than your subject, and that's because of the shadows that they cast. And again, there's lots of different ways that you can approach your lighting. A lot of times in horror movies, if they're trying to make something seem scary or intimidating, they'll do the key light lower, so the shadows are cast higher. And the idea is, if you are seeing a subject from a lower viewpoint, it makes them seem bigger. And you can use the same thing with snakes too, just depending on exactly how you want your lighting and what shot you want to go with. The next light is your fill light, and this is it is not necessary. The key light is definitely necessary in any given shot, and sometimes I don't use a fill light. The fill light is placed opposite of your key light. So if we have our key light over here, our fill light is on this side. I don't know if you can actually see my hand. And what the fill light is doing is it's filling in the shadowed side, not as strongly as the key light because you do want some more depth, but if you don't have the fill light, you can have some really harsh shadows and it just looks a little strange. Now, if you're going for a really, really dramatic effect, a lot of times what you'll want to do is have a really strong key light and no fill light, so that way it's one side is brightly illuminated with highlights and then the other side is kind of left in darkness, and it gets these really, really interesting visual pieces that is often used a lot in like model photography. The last one that I personally like, and I try to have it in almost all of my photos, is a hair light or a backlight. And in this situation, the backlight's actually coming from up here, and what it does is it is not giving so much of an illumination to the subject. Instead, it is separating your subject from the background. Without the backlight or the hair light, you aren't able to get the little bit of highlights right around here that help me, as the subject of the frame, pop from the background. And by being able to have all of these different lights, again, you don't always have to use them, and you can get great pictures without using them. You are able to have a lot of control over your subject and be able to draw the attention of your audience to the specific points of the subject that you want. Now, when you're going with snakes, it's a little bit more difficult because they kind of move around so much. So I don't know if you're going to be able to see, but right now, the curve of his back is going to be illuminated by our key light, and it's going to be hitting the tops a little bit by our hair light. But our fill light isn't doing a whole lot for him, so that way you're still able to see the shadows and get the depth of his body, hopefully. I don't know, we'll check in post, and I might have to cut out this part. Moving beyond lighting, the next thing that I think makes really, really good pictures is the white balance. And everybody is aware of the white balance, and you've all probably seen pictures where the white balance is off. And all that the white balance is if I were to hold up a just white piece of paper on this frame, does it look white? Does it look a little blue? Or does it look a little yellow? And there's not necessarily a problem with any of them. I tend to try to go for keeping my whites white. But if I'm wanting it to seem a little bit warmer, I might push it a little bit to the yellow side. You never want to go extreme on either direction, either cool or hot. You want to keep it very close to the whites, otherwise if you're extreme, it's going to look off. It's going to look weird. And for most people, when they look at photography, they are trying to look for really, really detailed, accurate representations of whatever they're seeing. Once it goes too much towards the other end, it's either going to look like a not very high quality photo, or it's going to get that feeling that there's a filter on it, and it just doesn't quite seem as professional. The next set of tips that I want to talk about have to deal with your actual shot, specifically the framing of the shot. And the easiest way that I personally can tell if a picture has been taken the time to be taken professionally is the vertical lines within the shot. The next bit of advice that I have has to deal with how you frame your shot. And when you frame your shot, there are a couple different items to keep in mind. One of them is keeping your verticals vertical. So if you're looking at this shot right now, we're going to be using this vertical line of the edge of the computer. If it was canted, maybe a little bit, so nobody's going to notice, but if it's canted extreme, like just maybe like this, it's going to be very obvious that the shot was done crooked. And sometimes that's an artistic choice. You can always think of those selfies where you're kind of holding out your phone to the side and just kind of canting your head. But when it comes to professional grade photography, you want your verticals to be vertical because that means that the photo is aligned to roughly what it is in the real world. The second one is the actual frame of the photo itself. So if you can think of a little border running around all your frame. The way that I try to go about shots is I generally think that the closer the shot is to the subject, the more interesting it is. It's not always the truth. But if I have a really, really close-up shot with a lot of detail, it's generally, especially with a high-quality picture, something that people don't really look at that much. They don't look at things really, really close up, especially one of these guys. And with all of their scales and the way that their scales can catch the light, whether it is your key light, your fill light, or your hair light, you can get a lot of interesting detail if you get really close-up shots. So the reason why I say the border of the shot is important, because if you have a really close-up shot and the snake is just right in the middle of the picture, I'm pretty sure that all of us have seen these on Morph Market. It looks cool, it gives you a good idea of what the snake looks like, but it's a little boring. It doesn't seem interesting. It almost seems like an advertisement. Instagram happens to support 3 different kind of layouts for pictures. The most common one is the square picture, and that's simply just 1,000 pixels by 1,000 pixels, square. It's really, really easy to do, but if you are thinking of using a square picture whenever you're taking one with your iPhone, you don't want to think of the frame as the outside of the iPhone. You want to think of the frame as a square, because that's what the picture will end up looking like to your audience. There's also landscape, which is 1080 pixels by 608. I think it's 608. I might be off just a little bit. And again, that's just if you turn your phone sideways and you take a picture like that, just about that's going to be good. And you're just looking at that kind of frame. A story is keep your phone vertical, just straight vertical, do your shot like that. And then the last one is a portrait picture for the feed. And a portrait picture's dimensions are 1080 pixels by 1350. If I was going to take a picture and just say this is the best one, I believe that all of the different formats have a place, and it really does depend on the subject. But strictly on the principle of Instagram, if you're scrolling through a feed, the portrait photo is going to take up the most space on a user's feed because all of the photos are going to be the exact same width across. And because the portrait picture has the largest height of all of them, it's going to take up more space. You can get a greater canvas to work with, and you have more time to actually catch your audience's attention. So I want to talk about all of these concepts with like an actual example, because it makes it a little bit easier to understand when I can just kind of point out exactly what's going on. For this picture, it is of our baby clown pastel, and her name is Quinn. So if you can notice on this picture, it's really, really close up. And while the picture does hit Quinn, and she is the focal point of the photo, there's a lot of other stuff going on without it being apparent. So one is that she is not just simply being put on the middle of a table or on a white background or something like that, like you see in a lot of pictures on Morph Market. Instead, it is showing you a foreshortened angle on which Courtney is holding her out towards me. And this just makes it a little bit more interesting because you can get a sense of motion. Back here in this corner, the upper left-hand corner, it is not in focus. And it's not in focus. This can be done with the iPhone through the portrait mode. And we actually took this picture with the D750, But you can get a very similar result using the portrait mode and just making sure that you have enough depth of field that you can get a little bit of a blur, because that blur gives the audience a sense that it is further away from them. And as you're able to see all of this, her scales, as well as the lines in Courtney's hands in like crisp focus, it's able to get that idea that they are bringing Quinn towards you. And by being able to capture this sense of motion in a photo, generally it makes it for a more interesting, high quality piece. I also want to talk a little bit about the lighting. So this was taken outside, and it wasn't done during the golden hour. It was actually really, really cloudy. It was like right after that hurricane that kind of hit the Gulf Coast recently. So in this photo, the light, natural light outside, it was pretty soft and really, really good, so that's why we took pictures. If you can tell, the scales right here on the ridge of her back have a highlight, and this would be the equivalent of using a hair light in an indoor setting, and this is because it's coming from the sky. But by being the fact that we didn't have any other lights going on, you can see right underneath Quinn's head the shadow, which in this situation actually makes it for a really, really interesting photo, because you can actually see the highlights on the ridges in Courtney's palm while that's still in shadow, and it just gives you so much depth and detail to the photo that you can just look at the photo for quite a while and just see all the complexity and kind of like detail that goes into whether it is Quinn or just the shot itself. For this photo, I want to talk about it mainly because of the framing that was done during it. So, the subject of the photo is our baby boa constrictor Naomi, and she is, again, not just put on a white background or a tablecloth and taken a picture of. Instead, she is wrapped around this tree branch that we have in our front yard, and the frame of the photo makes the eye start in the top left of the picture and travel down to the bottom right, and in it you see Naomi. And the fact that she mirrors the motion that you capture in the picture kind of helps establish a greater importance and just makes it a little bit more interesting. The last one that I want to note is that the ridge of her back and the gentle, almost perfect circular curve right here just adds a really, really pleasing visual detail. And then the rest of the photo, whether it is down here or up here, is not in focus, and that negative space is meant to draw the eye particularly to what we want the audience to see. Here's another one. This one actually does look way more like an advertisement than any of the other photos. But if we were going to ever put something on Morph Market, I personally believe that these photos are way more interesting than just the simple snake on a table, snake on a white background. And the reason why is, again, you get a sense of motion. By holding up Delilah, who is our 3-year-old female albino, by holding her up and letting her just kind of like droop down a little bit, just kind of look, we were able to get some really, really cool shots. And by having her body and my arm touch this part of the frame, top left, and the just left side, or the top, I guess. For this photo, it looks way more like an advertisement than any of the other ones. We actually did this one in front of a green screen, and we used Photoshop to key out our background color and then put in that purple that we use for just a branding kind of thing, and then dropped in the logo there at the bottom. But even beyond all of the actual post-production effects, I think that the photo itself, just simply the frame of Delilah and my arm kind of touching this corner, and then the natural rhythm as she's kind of falling down, you can see her head, her eyes are in focus, which is really, really important, and then my arm just kind of fading off as it gets out of focus, without the aperture's range of focus. Makes it for an interesting photo, but it still has that more marketing type vibe, which is useful when you are trying to sell a product, but not necessarily useful when you are trying to make her seem like a real animal. She kind of looks like something you would see in an advertisement. Here is an amazing picture that Courtney took the first day that we got Naomi. So Naomi is really, really small, and we're really excited about her being able to like grow up and be a 7-8 foot long boa. But right now, as you can see, she is just smaller than Courtney's hand. And the way that she was able to capture this picture, one, the tongue flick, where there's just that slight blur of the tip of the tongue, gives a sense of motion, as well as just like the perfectly timedness of it, as well as the extreme focus on Naomi herself. You can see the ridges of her scales, you can see her pattern, you get those gentle sweeps of her curves just coming up to her head, as well as down there at the tip of her tail. All of it together, and then as well as the just blur to the background, creates the focus of the audience right there on the most important element, which in this case is Naomi. This was also done on Courtney's iPhone, I believe. Okay, I want to do one more, and then we will jump back into the video, and we'll kind of wrap everything up. So this picture, again, just most of these have been square pictures for Instagram, and you may have already seen them already. This picture is of Chai, who was with me, but I went ahead and put him back up so that way I could kind of finish up this video. And the reason why I like this photo so much is that, one, it does a really cool job with hitting that frame. If you notice, the top left-hand corner is where the focus of the frame is. That's where you start. And then by bringing Chai into focus, so he's out of focus up here, and then his body curves around, gets that nice, gentle, nice curve, and then he comes up into focus, you can almost have a sense that he is in motion right here. It's just a really, really good photo that Courtney took. I think that it's awesome. And being able to play with what's in focus and what's not in focus is really, really cool. Another thing that I like so much about it is that her use of negative space is just stellar, because you are keeping the focus of the audience's attention on what's most interesting. You're not muddying up the rest of the background, you're not doing anything like that. It is just a beautiful snake and a beautiful photo. Thanks for watching, guys. We really appreciate it. Courtney's almost back with hibachi, and I'm really, really hungry, so I'm going to go ahead and cut this short now. If you haven't already followed the page, I would really appreciate it if you did. Leave a comment, anything like that, anything to show your support. We really, really appreciate it, and we hope that you're having a wonderful day.